more people in the waiting room getting joined here. This is great. But welcome to all of you to this webinar. We're going to be, this is specifically for those of you who are pretty new to Farm to School, whether you're First Bite grantees or your full tray grantees who are newer to Farm to School. We hope to cover some really good information and give you some time to do some thinking about your own plans for this year so that we can support you to have a really successful year as a Farm to School grantee with MDA. So thank you all for joining, for taking the time. And today we will be covering a lot of information, basically outlining some basics about the grant timeline and how it works, and some best practices to help you succeed. And then we will also be taking time, we'll go over a little bit of the rules around school food that you need to know and local procurement and advice. We'll share some resources with you as well. And we will be looking at your work plans and taking some time to have you actually work on those in this webinar. So there's a little bit of participation today, and we would ask you to find your work plan so that you can look at it. We're going to share some examples and let you kind of compare what you could include in that work plan to help you on your way. So I think, first of all, I think we're going to have too big of a group to do verbal introductions, but if you would all introduce yourselves in the chat, you can share your name, your location, and your role in Farm to School, whether you're the food service director or a chef, or maybe you're a teacher or another supporter in some way. So please introduce yourselves in the chat. And while you all are doing that, we, as the co-hosts of today's webinar, will introduce ourselves verbally. So my name is Erin McKee. I am the Community Food Systems Program Director at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. And I do support technical assistance for all of you grantees, and I'm also doing some evaluation of MDA's Farm to School grant program. And I'll pass it over to Kate.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Siebold. I work at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture on local and regional food systems work. And a big part of my job is Farm to School. So I get to work really closely with Erin and some others on the line on the Farm to School leadership team. And I work on the Harvest of the Month program, and I provide technical support to schools, including all of you as our Farm to School grantees. So I'll pass it to my colleague, Emily Mayer at MDA.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Mayer. I manage the Farm to School grants with my colleague Anne as well at the MDA. And so you've probably seen lots of emails from us. We're the go-to for contracts, reimbursements, quarterly reporting, all that good stuff. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out. It's great to see you all here. And I'll pass it over to Sammy.
Hey everybody, Sammy Brington. I work for the Minnesota Department of Education on Farm to School, sit on the leadership team with Erin and Kate, and also do the fresh fruit and vegetable program, help coordinate it. Nora.
Hi everyone, I work with Erin. My name is Nora Shields Cutler. I work with Erin on Farm to School eval and support over at IATP. Nice to see you.
Great, and it's so great to see so many awesome people in the chat. Thank you for introducing yourselves there. I see a lot of familiar names and some new ones too, so that's so exciting. We want you all to get inspired, and we're going to share 2 fun videos just highlighting some Farm to School action that's been happening in Minnesota. So we'll get started with the first one here.
Across Minnesota, communities are working together to get more local food in schools. Farm to School brings fresh, nourishing food from local farms directly to schools. It teaches us about where our food comes from, and it brings learning to life in classrooms and school gardens.
The benefits of farm to school reach all of us, whether you're a student, a farmer, a teacher, food service professional, or a community member.
Farm to School supports our local farmers and communities, and it helps students eat a variety of nutritious foods that keep us fueled for learning. Farm to School programs can look different at every school, but they share the same goals of highlighting local food and building connections between the cafeteria, classroom, and community. In school cafeterias, Farm to School brings fresh, local ingredients to our breakfasts and lunches. As part of the Minnesota Harvest of the Month program, we get to taste and learn about different local foods each month, from squash and wild rice to beef and dairy. And on Minnesota Thursdays, we have meals made with all locally sourced foods.
Each year in October, we celebrate Farm to School Month. One of our favorite ways to celebrate is by chomping into local apples for the Great Lakes Apple Crunch.
Farm to School is about building connections to our food and connections to one another. Join us in supporting our schools and our local farms.
So great. I love getting to see some kiddos, and I love to hear them talking about what this means for them to have farm to school in their own districts and schools. But we wanted to make sure that you could hear from another food service farm to school First Bite grant recipient. And we have a video to share that has Jennifer Walters, who is the school nutrition director in Winona Area Public Schools, and she was a 2021 First Bite grantee. And this is a video of her sharing her experience.
I'm Jennifer Walters, and I am the school nutrition director at Winona Area Public Schools. I'm a registered dietitian, and I recently received my MBA, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So we are talking today about the Minnesota Department of Agriculture Farm to School grants, and specifically you were a recipient of the First Bite Farm to School grant. What motivated you to apply?
Well, I've always wanted to support our local farmers. I think it's extremely important. So that's probably the first reason why I applied. The second reason is it can be kind of expensive to purchase things locally, and having this grant available is wonderful. It's such a benefit to all of us to have those funds.
Did you have any hesitations going into the application, or was there anything you were worried about?
You know, I really can't think of anything I was worried about going into the application. I think making sure that you do your research of where you can purchase some local products is beneficial, and you know, those are some things that you need to kind of gather ahead of time before you sit down and write the grant.
And would you share any of the positive outcomes that you think make it worthwhile for you to apply and get this grant?
It's wonderful. I mean, you can, for example, our apple orchard, we can say, you know, these awesome apples that we're eating are from, you know, Longhorn Orchard, and you know, people are like, oh, those are really good, and you know, this squash was picked right, you know, from our students' garden and brought in, and it's fun to have the farmers come in to the school, so people can see, like, oh, you're the person that grew these carrots. And
so great. Would you share, do you have any advice for food service directors if they're considering applying, maybe they've never applied for a grant like this before? What advice would you give them to get ready and to apply for this grant?
Well, the grant it is pretty self-explanatory, but one thing that I like is the timeline. So, you know, it helped me make sure that, oh, I need to talk to this farmer and this farmer and this farmer, because the farmers do need to plant enough for you. So that's important to say, you know, I'll be interested in purchasing some green beans from you.
Well, do you have any other comments you'd like to share, or anything else that you would tell a food service director out there who's thinking about applying?
You know, I think just, you know, probably think about five products that you want to start bringing into your schools, and, you know, start there. You know, just pick a number.
So great to hear from Jennifer, and I see that she's on the line today. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being willing to share your story, and it's great to hear an experienced First Bite grantee, your perspective on how that worked for you to kick us off here. I'll pass it over to Kate.
Thanks, Erin. And yeah, Jennifer, thanks for that video. I feel like it's a great segue into what we want to talk about today, which is work plans and thinking about how we get from where we are now to where we want to be in this grant. And as someone who has had a farm to school grant in the past to manage, it can sometimes feel like a little overwhelming, right? To think about like, okay, this is where I want to be at the end of this grant, and how do I get there? And I think building a work plan that feels helpful for you is a really great way to hopefully make that route a little easier to see. So the goal today is if your mind is perhaps looking like this maze here on the screen, that hopefully we can like help to kind of clarify the path forward and make things maybe feel a little less blurry or a little less overwhelming, and help you kind of think about those next steps and be able to anticipate some of those turns that are ahead. So just as a quick reminder for the grant timeline that we're on, so your food contracts, some of you have already signed them, and if your contract has been signed by all parties, you're good to go, and you can start buying your local food for this grant project. If your contract is not signed yet, wait for that. We need to make sure that it gets signed by everyone before you start working. And then your grant end date will be February 21st of 2024. So just as a reminder, this is a hard deadline. There's not the ability to do any grant extensions with the federal funding that we're using this year. So it's February 28th today, which means you have like 51 weeks, I guess, just shy of a year to spend these grant funds. So it's great that, you know, all of you are here and kind of thinking about how to make the most of those next 51 weeks. And then just as a reminder, your final grant report will be due on April 8th. We're not going to talk much about equipment today, but just a reminder that if you also received an equipment grant, that's a separate contract that's going to be coming with kind of some other logistics and different dates. So just remember that those are kind of two different contracts that you're going to be dealing with. So all of you submitted a work plan with your grant, which is a great starting point. And the hope today is just to kind of encourage you to look back at that work plan and think about, you know, if what's in it still resonates with you, if there's changes you want to make. Hopefully some of the information today can maybe give you some ideas of things you want to add or revise in it. So as Erin mentioned, we encourage you all to pull up your work plan so you can kind of follow along as we're talking about this and make notes. If you cannot track down your work plan and are having trouble finding it and want to be able to pull it up, Emily Mayer from MDA is on, and you can message her in the chat directly, and she can pull it up and email it to you, because we do have all of them on file. So once you have your work plan up, you know, really I think a helpful way to go about thinking about your work plan is, as I mentioned, to really start at the end. Like, what do you want to accomplish? What are your goals in this grant? And we know from reading the grants that all of you have some really great ideas in mind. And so the work plan really is then kind of serve as your roadmap to being able to accomplish that. And the best way that I like to do it is just to start working backwards from where you want to end up all the way to where we are now. And by working backwards, you can start to figure out those different steps you need to take. The timeline, you know, when do you need to start something? When do you need to have it wrapped up or figured out by? And then I think after that, you can think about who's responsible. And we'll talk a little bit about team approaches, but I do think that, you know, building a team to help support farm to school is a really great strategy to making it feel sustainable and that, you know, that it's really incorporated into the work that all of you do every day to serve great meals to kids. And so don't feel like it has to be all on you. And this grant, I think, can be a really great opportunity to try to build out that farm to school team if you don't have it yet. And then I would encourage you to share your work plan with that team or others that you want to bring into this work. Share it out with your staff so that they're aware of what this grant means for your work and kind of the timeline you're working on, and review it, you know, regularly, and then revise it as needed. I think a work plan should also be a somewhat living document where you might find that something you planned for your grant ends up kind of shifting, and it's okay to change your work plan so that it better reflects your plans in the moment. So with that, I think we're just going to talk through kind of some of the steps if you're thinking about your work plan. So, you know, I think a great place to start is, what do you want to serve, and when or how often are you serving that? So you heard Jennifer's advice in the video of like start with 5 items. Some of you in your grants mentioned, you know, interest in participating in Harvest of the Month and kind of selecting like 1 item a month that aligns with the Harvest of the Month calendar. That's a great way. Or maybe you're just going to try to really focus on like a few things in your salad bar. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, and Sammy's going to share a little bit more about that later. But think about, you know, what is it that you want to serve, how often, and then I'd also encourage you to think about when you're serving it, like how will you be promoting it? So are you going to be putting up Harvest of the Month posters? Are you going to be doing like a morning announcement, or, you know, having classrooms do an activity on the side? Maybe you're going to have a farmer come in that day. Think about that, because it's great to kind of have that promotion piece in the works right from the beginning, along with how you're going to be using the food. And so then think about, how are you going to be preparing it? And, you know, who on your staff needs to be clued into that? Do you need to develop any recipes or kind of put together instructions for what prep that day or the day before is going to look like for serving that local item? And then when do you need to receive that product by? So, you know, are you getting a delivery, you know, the day before, or do you need it a little farther in advance for doing some preparation? Or maybe it's, you know, going to be local beef that's coming to you frozen and you're going to get it, you know, farther back. But just kind of think through that timeline of when is that product coming in. I also think thinking through that step is really helpful when if you're working directly with a farmer, to communicate to them the timeline of how quickly something is going to be used. Because, you know, if you are having grape tomatoes delivered, there's, you know, only so many days that a grape tomato will last. And so I think being able to communicate how quickly from the time you receive it to the time that you're serving it, that will help a farmer understand your timeline so that they can think about that when they're deciding how ripe to let something get, or how quickly they need to be getting it packed up and delivered to you. Does the food need to be processed before it gets to you? This might be particularly relevant if you're planning to be buying local meats that need to go to a butcher beforehand, or maybe through your distributor or a local food hub you used, it's going to be you're getting produce that's going to be processed. So how long will that take, and what does that mean for the timeline between when the farmer delivers it there for processing to when you then receive it? Then working even farther backwards, when do you or the farmer need orders to be finalized? This is a really good thing to have a conversation about because, you know, some farms may want a rough estimate, you know, really early on, even in the spring, so that they can be planning accordingly. And then maybe a follow-up of like, here's the exact amount, you know, 2 weeks out or something. So think about that timeline on your end. And then when you have the farms or your vendors identified, what is the timeline that they're operating on, and do those align, or, you know, where do adjustments need to be made? And then, you know, kind of the first step is, who will you be buying from, and how will you find or choose those farms? So that's kind of one approach of how to, you know, build out your work plan. You may have other strategies, but hopefully these are questions that you can come back to kind of think about, like, do you have each of these steps reflected in your work plan of how you'll answer these questions? And that will help you then figure out what you need to be communicating with your staff, with your vendors, with your farmers, so that you can stay on schedule. And with that, one thing actually, going back to work plans, that I do just want to mention is, as you're looking at your work plan during this webinar and afterwards, know that, you know, you put together a work plan for this grant, and it is okay if that's shifting. So if there's, you know, plans on your work plan to be buying only local produce, and you're now interested in also buying some local meat or wild rice, or you want to shift some of the timing, that's okay. And we encourage you to think through that. And we just want it to get reflected in that work plan. So know that there's flexibility there. And what we're asking is that if you make changes to your work plan today or afterwards, to please just share them with MDA. So you can share them with Emily or myself or Ann Kush, and we can just then have your updated work plan on file, so that we can be helpful if you reach out with questions, or so that we're not asking you questions that we could otherwise find in your work plan. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sammy.
Yeah, so like Kate already kind of mentioned, building your team is important. And if you haven't already, I would spend a little bit of time thinking about how you might, because you don't have to do this alone. And you don't have to answer all those questions Kate already went through alone. It can feel like a lot if you do have to do that. And over the last couple of years, we found that schools that have had the most success with Farm to School have taken this sort of team approach. When Farm to School is implemented with success, it really connects those 3 C's of Farm to School: the cafeteria, classroom, and community. And one person can't be in all those places and do all of that alone. So while each team looks different from school to school, most have included something that looks like the roles listed here. So someone from the nutrition department, a classroom educator or a teacher, an administrator, and what we're calling a community connector. So someone that's like more connected with your community. It could mean like local public health, SHIP, a SNAP Ed educator, a farmer or a farmer's market hub manager, maybe a nature center director, or even a parent. This might not even be a brand new team either. You might enlist members from your already established school wellness committee to also play a role in your Farm to School team. Or it could be like a subcommittee of the wellness committee for those members particularly interested in Farm to School. So maybe building your team and thinking through some of these questions can be part of your work plan or process too. USDA actually has a really nice Farm to School planning guide that we can share the link to, and they walk through some of these questions. And the very first step, I think, is building your team. I can share that link, or maybe we already had plans to do that, but if it's helpful to some of you.
I think it is listed later on.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. We can go to the next slide. So while you're thinking about and updating your work plans for how you'll spend your grant funds, especially for those of you that are newer to Farm to School and local foods, it might be wise to start small and try to keep your plan simple. This might look like incorporating a taste test with local foods, something like Prior Lake Savage did during a lunch hour with a new recipe using actual Harvest of the Month foods. So it was a wild rice butternut squash pilaf. So you can see their picture there in the middle. Or maybe you choose to highlight local foods on your salad bar. Salad bars are actually a great way to serve local produce items in smaller quantities or volumes. And with salad bars, you might have more flexibility in case you need to sub something in or out, or you need to wait a week to get it from the farmer. Just all of the things that go along with our Minnesota growing season. And then you don't have to miss out on serving like a vegetable subgroup on your main line either if you're incorporating it into a salad bar. Your school might even plan a special event where local foods can be highlighted. So October is when we celebrate Farm to School Month here in Minnesota and across the nation. And it's a fun way to celebrate by having students crunch into local apples together during the Great Lakes Apple Crunch Day, usually the second Thursday in October. And after you see how much your students love those local apples, you probably will decide to serve local apples more often and throughout the fall. So it's a good start into farm to school and local foods. Some schools have also had farmer to school days where on the day the local food is being served, the farmer comes to visit during breakfast or lunchtime and help serve and talk with the students. You heard Jennifer say that earlier too. I think we can go to, a few more bites or a half tray. So maybe your school is ready to take that next step and add in a few more local foods. And like Jennifer said earlier, maybe you look at her strategy, look at 5 different foods on your menu to buy locally. It's really at this point when you're ready to jump in a little bit more, it's a good idea to look at your menu, your existing menus, and look at all types. Look at breakfast and lunch, of course, maybe even a snack, or if you offer FFVP, look at all those programs and all the components within those meals. So meat alternates, grains, fruits, veggies, of course, and also your milk. And then think through what products would you or could you source locally and what time of year would it work to do that here in Minnesota, and where you could sub in a similar but local product. Are there recipes you could sub in a local ingredient? So like your barbecue pulled pork sandwich, could you instead incorporate some local turkey or substitute local turkey? And maybe you start out by doing this just once, trying it out, figure out if the students like it. Maybe you have to make a few tweaks to the recipe and come up with a plan to incorporate it then each time it's menued or on your cycle menu. Or while in season, you might include local cucumbers, carrots, tomatoes on your salad bar line instead of ordering an outstate product. Really think through your whole entire menu if you can. The entrees, side dishes, salad bars, condiments. Condiments are a good one, honey, syrup, and all the ingredients. And look for those opportunities where you can slowly, baby steps, start to incorporate more local foods to be served to your students. But again, only do what you can do right now. Don't bite off more than you can chew, literally, I think. And then we'd also encourage you, whether your school is taking the first bite in Farm to School or you're ready to take those few more bites, to participate in Harvest of the Month. Harvest of the Month really was built with flexibility in mind from the very beginning. So even if you're going to only pick one of the foods in Harvest of the Month and offer it during Farm to School Month, let's say, or September, that's okay. You can do that. Or you can decide, hey, all fall long, I'm going to highlight a different food each month. You can do that. It's very flexible. And for those of you who may not have heard about Harvest of the Month yet, it's a farm to school marketing program that really connects, again, those 3 C's of farm to school I talked about earlier: cafeteria, classroom, community, and showcases Minnesota grown foods in schools. Really, the idea is that each month, or again, however often your school chooses, participating sites focus on promoting at least one locally grown item by serving it in a meal or a taste test, and then also displaying or distributing our Harvest of the Month materials, and they're all free. So we have things like posters, stickers, salad bar clings, recipe cards, newsletter content, social media content, and then fun videos to share with different age groups. Schools also participate by, or can participate by, also conducting educational lessons and activities in the classroom. And then each month we also gather together as like a peer-to-peer group to share best practices and learn about different things about our Harvest of the Month foods. And really the ultimate goal of Harvest of the Month is to expose students to local foods and build that excitement around school meals. So we encourage your school, if you haven't already, to check out our website, take the pledge, and then order your free materials. We have cubes full of materials, so we want to get them out and being used in schools. And then maybe some of you are ready to begin incorporating an entirely locally sourced meal to your students, or maybe that'll come in a few years down the road. Don't worry if you're not there yet, but it might take like 5 years to build those relationships, train your staff, obtain the necessary kitchen equipment to offer a fully locally sourced meal at your school. You might have to create more buy-in to get there, or maybe you're just finally able to get kitchen staff or your kitchen staff fully staffed, and that's okay. We just want to show you what some of the schools in Minnesota are offering, and they're calling it Minnesota Thursday, so it kind of has a brand behind it, and they usually do it on the first Thursday of every month, and some schools have even taken it to like the first and third Thursday or every Thursday of the month too, or of the week. So you can kind of be creative and do what works best for your school. So let's go. So here are just a few examples. The left one is from Minneapolis, where they've also incorporated some of the Harvest of the Month foods. And then the right one is from Dover, Iota. So you can see that there's some local hot dogs or a local hamburger with local bakery buns, watermelon, sweet corn, tomatoes, and onions. Yum. And same sort of meal on the left too. You can go ahead, Kate, sorry. And just a final example of what a full tray could look like, but really these are examples that you could sub, just 1 or 2 items out on your tray too. So that local apple, or you might try some frozen yogurt. Of course, milk probably is, if you want to just promote it as that. A lot of schools are already doing this, but it just hasn't been shared with students before. Broccoli, and then a turkey meatball from Ferndale. All right. Is this where I hand it back over, Kate?
Yep. Thanks, Sammy. That's great. Yeah. So I think hopefully those are just examples of kind of what you can be thinking about in your menu planning for kind of what you want to focus on your first bites. And again, maybe you're not ready for a full Minnesota Thursday meal. That's totally okay. Or maybe, your one big special is going to be kind of building out your first to learn from it. I think, every school does it a little differently, and hopefully these are just some ideas of inspiration. I also just want to note that this meal looks fantastic and it's all local, but just a reminder that as you're thinking about your grant, the milk you can promote as local, but it's not a reimbursable meal item, and same with the breadstick and the mixed meat. So I just wanted to flag that.
And then also, Kate, there is a good question. We did talk about like taste test, or maybe like food offered outside the reimbursable breakfast or lunch. That necessarily wouldn't be, if it's not like a local apple served with a reimbursable meal, it's not allowable expense with this grant funding. But overall, these are different ways you could still incorporate local foods and start doing that, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
This grant, is focused on breakfast and lunch. So we are kind of sharing some other ideas of just kind of how to think about building up your farm to school program. I think that if you are, serving something for lunch, that's a farm to school item, and, you want to be offering like, a taste or something, I think that would probably be okay. If you have questions, please reach out to us. But the purpose of this funding is to really focus on those meals. So not FFVP or things like that. But I think it's helpful for you to be thinking about kind of how to connect your grant with your broader kind of farm to school vision for your district. So we want to spend some time talking about how you're finding your local food items. We know many of you have plans in place, which is great, but perhaps you're still looking or, you know, open to some suggestions of how to find new local items to be purchasing with your grant. So there's kind of two ways, again, that you can go about your local sourcing. You could be purchasing your local foods directly from producers, from farms, or you could be choosing to work with your distributor or an aggregator like a food hub or a farmer's market hub. So this is perhaps not new information because I know we covered it at the kickoff webinar too, but just as a reminder, some places or resources that you can use as you're looking for farms. So if you're looking to work directly with farmers, I really encourage you to start at using the Minnesota Grown Wholesale Directory as a first step, perhaps, in seeing what farms are around your area that are listed in that, because farms that are listed in the wholesale directory are farms that have expressed interest in working with wholesale accounts like schools. It's certainly not, you know, not every farm that's willing to work with a school is listed in it. So don't be discouraged if, you know, you're not finding the farm you're hoping to on there. But it's a really, I think, helpful starting point. And I'm going to give you a little demo of that after this slide. But a couple other things to think about is like, where are nearby schools or restaurants buying from? So ask around. I think all of you on this call can be resources to one another. So once we have all of the grant contracts signed, we will be like putting out a list of all of the schools. And so we encourage you to reach out to one another, especially if you're in, you know, areas nearby, to see, you know, who are the farms that you're working with and where did you find this product, and help one another with that. You could also think about like, who are the farms near you that you know that offer CSAs, which are community supported agriculture shares, or who are the farms that are selling at your local farmers markets. Perhaps they, you know, haven't worked with the school before, they're not listed in the wholesale directory yet, but working with you may be something they're interested in doing and could be a great first step for them and kind of venturing into the wholesale market world. So the Minnesota Farmers Market Association does have a Find Your Market database where you can find the farmers market near you. And this time of year, there's also a lot of farms being promoted for offering CSAs, including Minnesota Grown, but you can also look on some other sites to find farms that offer that, like Land Stewardship Project, for instance. So all places that you can kind of do some research to find some farms near you. And then I would also encourage you to just connect with other people in your community who are well connected with farmers. So again, your, you know, local or your county-based extension agents, SHIP coordinators, SNAP educators, Farm Service Agency office. All these people might be folks that can either connect you directly with a farm or help connect you with other people who can serve as that connector. And then if you're looking to work kind of through a distributor or an aggregator, you know, again, you can start with the distributors that you work with already to ask them what their local options are. And if you're doing that, I would just encourage you to remind them that when buying local items, you will need their help in being able to identify the specific Minnesota farm that it's coming from. And similarly, you can connect with a food hub or a farmer's market hub. So with that, I'm going to just show you quickly the Minnesota Grown Wholesale Directory. So maybe some of you have been to the Minnesota Grown webpage before, or maybe you haven't. So if you just type in minnesotagrown.com, this is the webpage that will come up. Minnesota Grown is a program operated by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And it's meant to be a resource in, helping farms market their product to consumers. So if you just go here at the top, like the search directory, this is a great place for you to go, like personally, if you're looking for a farm that offers, a CSA share that you want to get, or maybe you're looking for a find your own, pick your own apple orchard for the fall or strawberries in the spring. The farms listed in the just general search directory are kind of focused on selling direct to consumer. So if you're looking for farms though, that you want to work with for farm to school, I'd encourage you to go over to the wholesale directory, because again, these are farms that have selected to have their name appear in this wholesale directory. So many of them have experience selling to larger accounts like schools, and might just be a better starting point for you. So once you're here, you can click learn more about, that's just general information about the wholesale directory, but otherwise you can just keep scrolling down. And as you see here, you can just search the directory like for a specific item. And it has this map here where you can kind of see, right now it's like the whole state. So you can like zoom in on the map based on where you are. You can also set your search function. Do you want to find farms within 25 miles? Maybe you want to go up to 100 miles. You can enter your location. There's also additional filters that you can set. So you could, say you're just really interested in looking at fresh produce right now. And so you could just click fresh produce, and here you can see, and you can kind of interact with the map. Maybe you're in the Duluth area. Who are the farms that are here that are listed in the wholesale directory as being produce? And you can kind of see here, you can keep clicking in. There's 2 farms. Here's North Harvest Farm, and this is Food Farm. And you can click on their listing. And here's Food Farm, it's in Renshaw. And here are some products that they offer. This might not be an exhaustive list, but these are ones that they kind of want to promote. And then they have some information here. So 15 acres of incredible produce. They sell to co-ops, grocery stores, etc. The wholesale directory notes information about like insurance and certifications that you don't see on just the general direct to consumer. So it does list if they're certified organic and if they have limited liability insurance. And then this is where I would encourage you to spend some time perusing when you're looking at these listings. It will talk about how often they deliver to the area and if they have their own driver. Some farms, farms will provide different levels of information, but they're going to have information on distribution and their experience. And so that's just a great way for you to get a little bit more information about them before reaching out to see if you think it might be the farm that would be a good fit or willing, a good option for you to reach out to. So that's kind of one way. If we just go back to the main page too, I just want to show that you can just type in, maybe you just know specifically like, I'm really looking for cucumbers. So you just type in cucumber, and the map and the farms below will be sorted accordingly. And so we're still zoomed in here kind of on the Duluth area, but you can zoom out and kind of see more broadly farms in the area, and it'll move around. And then as you change the map view, the different farms will appear. So again, this is, I think, just a helpful starting point. If you're really kind of starting from scratch and looking for these farms, these are great ones to reach out to begin with, since you can kind of get some initial information and then follow up with a conversation. So that is just a plug for the Minnesota Grown website. If you have any questions while you're using it, feel free to reach out, or also feedback on it, because we're also always interested to hear from schools and others about how we can make it a more useful tool. Oh, and I'll just note, they do have the actual contact information listed here. So if you go to the listing, you can get their email or their phone number, and there's a link to their website as well. If you're planning to work directly with farms, a few things that are worth thinking about and talking with them if you think you may be working together. And these are things that I think are helpful for you to start talking about early on, so you can, plan accordingly with that farm as your grant project progresses. So volume, how much do you need of an item and how often? And how much flexibility do you have? So let's say, you're planning for 500 pounds of carrots. What happens if a farm ends up having, more available? Would you be interested in knowing, because you could perhaps use extra? Or if they fall a little short because weather didn't cooperate and they ran a little short, are you able to work with less? Think about, what size, shape, quality you may need, and communicate that with the farm so that they can plan and grow and harvest the crops accordingly. Does it need to be washed or trimmed or processed? For a lot of the specific specifications around like produce versus animal protein, we're not going to get into that today, but I encourage you to attend the upcoming webinars we have scheduled. We have one all about produce where we're going to talk about this in more detail, and one similarly for local meats. And then talk about timing. So like, when do you need it? How much flexibility do you have in that? And then delivery, like, where do you want it delivered, and are there multiple locations? And does that work for the farm? And if so, is there a minimum order that needs to be placed? And then I would also encourage you to think about food safety and pricing. So again, this is just kind of a guide as you're thinking about some of those conversations you're having with producers. Kind of go through this list and make sure you're checking those boxes. And now is a great time to be talking with farmers because they're about to get busy this spring in the field. And so the more kind of upfront planning conversations you can have now, the better. And that also gives them time to plan and order their seeds and plant their fields accordingly, with you in mind. So hopefully all of this helps you then think about what you want to have reflected in your work plan. And I actually think that having a detailed work plan will be helpful then when you're in conversation with farmers or your distributor, whoever, on what local products you're planning to buy. So the next kind of activity we're going to do after this is give you just a little bit of time to review your work plan, and then we're actually going to do breakouts where you'll get to talk with a few people about what's in your plan, what you're still thinking through, and just kind of chat together. But before that, we wanted to just highlight kind of 2 work plans, just as samples for you to think about. These are work plans that we took from 2 grantees and kind of tweaked. But I think they provide some really nice examples of how you can be thinking about your work plan. So this is kind of work plan sample A, I guess. And what I really like is right away in February and March, they're reaching out to food hubs and farmers, both to kind of think about what they have to offer. They're thinking about and communicating about the items and the amounts that they're looking for, and they're discussing pricing. Then in the summer, they plan out their cycle menus with estimated dates that the local foods will be on the menu. I think estimate is a key word here. I think it's really helpful for you to think through, when you would fit it in specifically, but also recognize that the growing season and the weather will cooperate however it wants to, and some items may be ready slightly earlier or later. And so thinking through what that means for your menu and how to navigate that with a farmer is important. Then in September and October, they're maximizing their use of fresh produce while it's available. And so they list out some different examples. I also love this. In September, they're reaching out to teachers to ask if they're interested in having a farmer come talk to their class, or they may invite a local farmer to come to lunch. And so maybe you want to plan a special lunch in September for that farmer to visit. In October, they're participating in the Great Lakes Apple Crunch, which is fantastic. And then you can see November and December, they're kind of featuring specific items. So in November, they're going to plan to serve winter squash. In December, they're thinking about meats or cheese curds and wild rice, which are all harvest of the month items. And that explains why monthly they're going to be using harvest of the month materials to promote those foods. I also love this. They're taking photos of farm to school items in their whole form, processed form, and what it looks like on the menu so that they can share that on social media. And I think that's such a great idea. And it's good to be thinking about those promotion pieces so that you don't get caught up in the moment and forget those things you want to do. And then this is another example. So sample B. Similarly, they're planning to, how they'll incorporate those farm to school items right around now, and they're providing forecasted usage to the farms and food hubs that they're going to be working with. So I think, being able to give those estimates of how much you're going to use is really helpful. And so thinking about, if you're going to be buying squash, will you be serving it at all of your schools? Just, one of them? Is it something going on the salad bar versus, being served with each meal? And being able to kind of give those estimates to farmers now is really a fantastic way so that they can plan their work with you. Then they're doing ongoing marketing. In March and April, they're going to do some recipe taste testing. So this is a great time to get kind of ready for the new year. So pick out some of those farm to school items you want to do. And if there's a new recipe you're planning, do that taste testing now. I'll make another plug. Harvest of the Month. We have a recipe database that you can use to find recipes already scaled for school food service that feature these different local foods. In August, they're going to plan a Meet Your Farmer event during Farm to School Month. And then in August, that's when their first produce orders are going to start. And they're going to continue bi-monthly purchases for Minnesota Thursdays and Harvest of the Month. And then again, continue with ongoing marketing. So again, these are just examples of what some work plans look like that I think have a nice balance of like planning with farmers, planning internally with recipe development and communicating with staff, and then that promotion side as well. Some high level takeaways that we wanted to kind of stress after this. We know we talked through a lot of information and thinking through work plans can sometimes be a task or perhaps feel a little overwhelming. And so some advice or suggestions from us that you can consider is, really there's so much you can do with farm to school. And I think it's easy sometimes to look at examples of what other districts are doing and perhaps wonder like, how will I get there or how can I do that? And, I encourage you to just start small and, accept that everyone has to start somewhere and there's always room for growth. And that's the beauty, I think, of a First Bite grant, or even if you have a full trade grant, but you're newer to farm to school, it takes time, and every, small first bite you take, I think, will build on the next, and eventually you'll get to whatever big vision it is that you want to get to. And as you're doing that, remember that this is a learning opportunity. Hopefully this grant that you have this year will help you learn and figure out some things that will help you continue to do farm to school in the future. And hopefully it's a way to engage your staff, get them excited about farm to school, build new relationships with farmers in your area, and get kids in your schools excited or interested in trying new local foods. So this is a learning opportunity, and I'm sure that as you go through the grant, there'll be things you think about like, oh, I'll do this different next time, or I wish I'd thought of doing that. And that's okay, and write it down, and you can always think of it for next year. As I mentioned, it's a great time to build relationships, and that includes, I think, the relationships between all of us here. So know that you have a community support in doing this grant, and use one another as resources, use us who are presenting today as resources. Remember that when it comes to like promotion and marketing and education, the Harvest of the Month program, I think, is a really great program that you can use to help promote and highlight all of the great work that you're going to be doing to buy and serve local foods. And remember that we have opportunities like the TA office hours and webinars, which Erin's going to highlight after this actually, for you to continue to gather together in community and hear from one another and glean ideas. And then I would say that if you've made any changes to your work plan or you make changes in the future, please send them to, I listed Emily Maier's email address here. It should also say Ann Kush. So depending on who has been at MDA, like sending you your grant contract or communications, feel free to send it to them or Emily or myself. We're all here to help, but we'd love to have those on file if you make those changes, just so that we're in the loop and can answer any questions as you're making those changes. And I don't remember who was going to do this slide, but I can just quickly mention that these are just some resources to keep in mind. So the University of Minnesota Extension has a great Farm to School webpage. The Minnesota Department of Education has a Farm to School webpage. There's also a great toolkit called like Food for Farms. We also mentioned the USDA Farm to School Planning Guide. We'll include all of these in our follow-up email, but there's great examples. There's also examples from districts, including the Minneapolis Public Schools has a Farm to School toolkit. All resources that if you're looking for more, these are great places to go to for ideas as you're putting together your Farm to School plans. And I will pass it to you, Erin.
Yes, I just wanted to share that, and we will share links to this because this is a lot for all of you to try to get to right away. But I think there are 2 Farm to School 101 webinars that are really helpful for you to know that they exist. On the farmtoschoolmn.org/resources website, there's one that's specifically about planning your local school menu. So thinking through like what items you want to highlight. And then there's also one on buying local foods for your school meals. So where are you going to get them? How do you find farmers? Some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat, like, can I go to a farmer's market? How do I do a bid? Those kind of things we cover in pretty good detail with different experts that are food service directors and then experts who share their tips on those. So those are previous webinars that are recorded and the videos of those are housed online for you to review. And then going forward, we have upcoming webinars that are planned. And you can register for those individually. So they are on specific topics. There's one on buying local produce. There's one that's actually directed towards farmers or food hubs or distribution companies that is about making connections with schools. So if you want to share that with your contacts that you're buying from so that they can learn about how the different rules and things about selling to schools. There's one specifically on local meat and protein, and then one on the local foods around the tray, so non-produce, non-meat local food options that we will highlight as well. And I will grab a link to the registration page for those in just a moment. But right after that, I wanted to highlight that I know we're seeing some questions in the chat and we are almost out of time here today. We have a monthly office hour that you can come to it's specifically meant for you to be able to ask timely questions. You can talk through and troubleshoot not only with us as members of the leadership team, but we have a lot of food service directors who come to these calls, and we have seen really great connections and peer-to-peer learning too that have happened because you all actually know better than I do about exactly how it works to fit these things into your meals. So I will put the link to both the webinars to register for those upcoming and to register for those office hours in the chat for you all. And I know we have just 1 minute left. And I think with that, I don't know if we have time to address like all the different questions that we have. One that I did think was very relevant to this specific topic was someone had asked, is it okay if they don't spend all their funds until the fall of 2023? And then because you have the quarterly reporting deadlines and things, how would that work with the reporting?
Yeah, so I can take a first pass, and Emily, feel free to chime in if there's anything you want to add. But it is okay if you're not spending any of your funds until the fall. And I think that we will still have you send in a report just to indicate that no purchases have been made. That way we know not to keep bugging you in case you had made purchases. So you can just send in the report, you know, showing that no items had been purchased. And yep, totally okay if you don't have anything to buy until the fall. And I'm seeing Emily's confirming, yes, just send us a blank report.
Great. Well, we do have the questions that we didn't get to saved in the chat here, so we're going to send out a follow-up email, and we will address those in our follow-up as well. But we want to respect all of your time, and thank you. This was already a long webinar, but there was a lot to cover, so thank you for taking the time and for being here today. And as Kate said, we are here to help you. We're ready to support you. Please do take advantage of those office hours if you want to get into your questions into the weeds. And hopefully those other webinars will be helpful, but we really are excited about this great group of First Bite grantees. It's awesome to see how many of you are doing really awesome work and great farm to school initiatives all around the state. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thanks to my co-presenters.